What questions do you have today about starting to feed your baby?
I guess I'm just curious if she's sitting up well enough to start feeding. Like, how much do we start feeding her at a time? We just introduced it at dinner time.
She has questions too.
Or if we do it multiple times a day when we first start.
Those are great questions. Have you looked into the styles of baby feeding at all? Do you have any ideas about whether you want to do a traditional puree or baby-led weaning? Do you have questions about those things?
Yeah, I've looked into both. I think I'm going to start her with purees, get her familiar with using a spoon. But I think I'll do a lot of baby-led weaning once we get going.
Welcome to Eat Your Greens with Dr. Black, Small Bite Edition. This podcast is all about supporting families in their efforts to give their children a solid foundation of healthy eating habits that will last a lifetime. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Black. I'm a board-certified pediatrician with over 20 years of experience. I'm passionate about using evidence-based guidelines to teach my patients and their parents how to prevent chronic diseases for a lifetime of health. In today's episode of Eat Your Greens, we're just taking a small bite. Small bite episodes give you the opportunity to get advice direct from a pediatrician in 10 minutes or less. I'll serve up a snack-size answer to some of the most common questions I get asked in the office. Don't forget that this podcast offers general health information about nutrition and feeding of infants and children. It's meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace the important relationship between a parent, child, and pediatrician. If you have concerns about your child's nutrition, health, or growth, please consult your doctor. For more episodes, or if you would like more information about child nutrition and feeding, please visit www.eatgreenswithdrblack.com. Welcome to episode 13 of Eat Your Greens with Dr. Black. The first year of life is an exciting and precious time where every day brings a new delight as you watch your newborn grow and learn about the world they've been born into. Feeding and nourishing your baby is no exception. But sometimes this process can be fraught with worry, and parents often have doubts about how to go about introducing baby's first foods. Whether you're a first-time parent or just want to keep up to date with the latest recommendations on infant feeding, this episode is for you. In this small bite episode, I'm going to share the best strategies for starting your baby on their first foods. Did you know that when a pregnant mother eats, molecules can cross the placenta and baby may be able to taste foods from mom's diet by about 30 weeks of gestation? Expecting mothers should try to eat a wide variety of healthy, whole foods throughout their pregnancy. Not only does this support their health, but it may help babies to accept new flavors later. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization recommend exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. In our office, we encourage and support breastfeeding as much as possible, but sometimes formula is necessary, and that's okay. When it comes to your baby's health, fed is best. The food in mom's diet can affect the flavor of breast milk, and some studies suggest that breastfed babies are less likely to be picky eaters later compared to formula-fed babies. Breast milk and formula have all the nutrition and fluids your baby needs for the first 6 months of life. There's no need to add in cereal or extra water unless your pediatrician recommends those for specific health concerns. Early in my career, we had all kinds of rules about how to go about starting baby food. For example, one of my professors in medical school went so far as to say that parents should start with baby cereal and then move on to yellow or orange vegetables, followed by green vegetables. After that, they could offer some fruit, and meats were offered last. Humans evolved to prefer sweet flavors. Starting with vegetables first is actually not going to change this. There's really no scientific evidence to support offering foods in a rigid order, so it's okay to mix it up. Back then, it was also recommended that parents wait to offer foods with a higher allergy risk until between 1 and 3 years of age. Now we know that introducing those foods earlier may actually reduce the risk of developing allergies. Man, a lot has changed. So how do you know when your baby's ready? Naturally, every baby's different, but most babies are ready to start eating at around 6 months of age. Now, if your baby was premature, they may need to wait until a little bit older. Be sure to talk to your pediatrician or the developmental specialist so that they can help guide the timing of introducing foods. To begin with, your baby should be able to sit in a high chair and keep their head steady. You'll notice that they start to open their mouth when food is near, and they're super interested in what you're having to eat. They kind of start looking like your pet dog begging at the dinner table. They should also be able to use their hands to intentionally bring objects to their mouth. Now, 4-month-olds will bring their hands to their mouth and they try to chew on everything, but 4-month-olds don't usually have the steady head control, and they often still have something called a tongue thrust reflex. If you put a spoonful of food in a baby's mouth and they immediately push it out with their tongue, then they still have that tongue thrust reflex and they're not ready to start baby foods. All right, so you've been watching your baby. You notice that they're showing all the signs that they're developmentally ready, and you've gone out, you've invested several $100 on a high chair, bowls, spoons, bibs, a baby food blender, of course, a bunch of sponges, and a good mop. It's time to start feeding. In the office, I tell my parents that I have only 2 rules when it comes to starting solids: everything in a bowl and offer new foods one at a time. Don't mix cereal or other purees into baby's bottle. They need to learn to use a spoon. They need to experience new flavors and textures, and they need to be able to move the food from the front of the mouth to the back so that they can swallow. Pick a food you think they'll like, and then give it for about 3 to 5 days before introducing the next food. Monitor closely for reactions during this time. Everything else, like what food, how much, how many times per day, is individualized to suit not only the baby's needs, but also the family dynamic. For the most part, it's best to choose a time of day when you know your baby tends to be the most active and interested in exploring the world. Start with just a tablespoon or 2 of food, and don't worry if more of it gets on your baby than in your baby. Learning to eat should be a whole body experience. The baby gets to see the food, touch it, feel it, smell it, and taste it. Making a mess is part of the experience. Start with one type of food and then gradually build on the variety. If your baby seems to resist feeding by turning their head away or spitting it out, just wait a week or 2 and try again. Let me tell you about my experience with my oldest. When I started introducing foods, I did the traditional baby cereal first, and she seemed to like it. She didn't have a problem with it. And then the first other food I started with was squash. That first spoonful went in her mouth, and she literally gagged. I mean, like she thought it was the most disgusting thing ever. And then for about 2 weeks would not let me come near her with anything on a spoon, even the cereal that she had liked in the past. I mean, she totally did not trust me to put anything in her mouth after that. I've had patients who resisted starting baby food until almost 10 months of age. So don't stress about it. Just gently offer something every week or so and don't force the issue. Most babies will get there in their own time. Now, if you're worried that this is an extreme aversion to foods, never hesitate to talk to your doctor. All right, so what kinds of foods might you consider trying first? In a nutshell, no, wait, maybe that's the wrong figure of speech to use here. Definitely don't start with anything in a nutshell. Let me try again. Simply put, babies can eat almost any type of food as long as it's not a choking hazard or honey. When I very first started practicing pediatrics, I worked with a doctor who recommended starting out with the pureed meats first. His whole feeding philosophy was that the pureed meats tasted so bad that if the baby would eat that, they would eat anything. His patients all survived and did fine. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that strategy. But first foods should be pureed or soft enough to be mashed easily with a fork. You can mix in some breast milk or formula to help thin it out. Examples include avocado and banana. You could also try cooked and mashed beans or fruit that's cooked until it's soft. My experience with Catherine aside, vegetables like squash and sweet potatoes also make excellent first choices. Be sure to include bitter flavors like spinach and kale. If babies taste these flavors in the first year of life, they're less likely to reject them as a toddler. Also, make sure that you're offering foods that provide iron and zinc. This would include iron-fortified baby cereals, green leafy vegetables, tofu, and lentils. Even eggs, meat, and fish are okay as long as caution is used to minimize choking risks. Of course, just like for adults, it's always best to limit foods high in salt, sugar, and unhealthy saturated fat. If you are offering fish, consider salmon or other fatty fish. These have higher amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, which are good for brain development. But don't go overboard because these fish are known to be sources of toxic mercury. A vegan diet can be healthy even for infants and young children if it's done thoughtfully. Talk to your pediatrician about special considerations to ensure that your baby is getting enough protein, iron, vitamin B12, and those omega fatty acids. Not only is it important to offer a variety of flavors, but texture is also important. Include things that are smooth, lumpy, soggy, even slimy or slippery. The official recommendation of the Academy of Pediatrics is to start with spoon-fed purees and gradually advance to include chunks and then finger foods. But many parents these days are choosing to do something called baby-led weaning. So let's talk about it. Proponents of baby-led weaning point out that by 6 months, babies can use their hands to bring things to their mouth. So they recommend skipping the spoon feeding altogether and going right to finger feeding. You start right off the bat with soft pieces that the baby can pick up and eat on their own. The parents decide what foods to offer and when, but the baby decides which foods of what's offered they will eat and how much. Just like anything, baby-led weaning has pros and cons. On the positive side, there is evidence that babies will learn to listen to their own hunger and fullness cues, and they may have lower rates of obesity later. They also may be less picky. Baby-led weaning may be less expensive because you don't have to buy all of those pre-made, pureed baby foods. On the other hand, there is a concern about a potential lack of iron in the baby-led weaning diet. This is because the main source of iron for a breastfed infant is the fortified cereals, which are not finger foods. There's also a concern about choking risks if parents are offering pieces of food that the baby's not yet ready to handle. There have been very few studies on baby-led weaning, so there's a lack of evidence to support this practice. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong. We just don't have the evidence. Ultimately, this is a personal decision for families. Be sure to talk to your pediatrician if you're interested in doing baby-led weaning to make sure that you're reducing choking risks and offering foods with all the nutrients that babies will need. Speaking of choking, let's talk about some things you can do to prevent it. Make sure your baby is sitting upright and offer small, soft pieces that baby can mash up with their gums. Give just a few bites at a time and then encourage the baby to take a sip of water, breast milk, or formula to ensure that they have swallowed everything in their mouth. If your baby is mobile, don't allow them to crawl or walk around with food in their mouth. Foods that are at higher risk for choking include anything that really needs to be chewed, like chunks of meat or chunks of crunchy fruits and vegetables. These should all be cooked until they're soft. Also, avoid nuts, popcorn, hard candy, and whole round foods like grapes and cherry tomatoes. Those foods are just the right size and shape to block the airway, so be sure to cut them up into small pieces. Now, people also talk about hot dogs. That coin shape that you get when you cut them up is also just the right size and shape to block the airway. So the recommendation is to cut those into small pieces as well. Personally, I say just avoid the hot dogs altogether. They're a processed meat. They are strongly associated with cancer development later in life. So pretty much I would say never give a hot dog in their entire life, regardless of how you cut it up. There are several free first aid courses available online that can teach you how to help people of any age who are choking, including infants. So I recommend that all parents sign up for one of these. Here are just a few more tips. It should be emphasized that you should never give babies under a year of age honey. Honey contains the spores of the organism that causes botulism. Babies can't digest these spores, and they can develop infantile botulism. Infantile botulism is very difficult to treat and is often fatal. So never ever give a baby honey. I mentioned at the start of the episode that earlier introduction of certain foods may help to reduce the risk of allergies. This includes peanut butter. Of course, you're not going to give your 6-month-old a PB&J sandwich, but you can put a small smear of the peanut butter on your finger or a pacifier, or you can mix a small amount into another food. This introduces the peanut protein to your baby's immune system and may help reduce the risk that they'll be allergic to peanuts. The caveat here is if your baby has severe eczema. People with eczema may have a higher risk of food allergies, so if your baby has severe eczema, you may want to see an allergist to help guide the introduction of solid foods. If during the process of introducing these new foods you become concerned that your baby has a food allergy or intolerance, hold off on that food until you can talk to your pediatrician. Be sure to listen to my next episode where I discuss the difference between a food allergy and an intolerance and how to know if you or your child might be at risk. Always be sure to keep feeding times relaxed and happy. Reduce distractions, turn off the TV, put down your phone. Take this time to really connect with your baby. Regardless of whether you're starting with purees or doing baby-led weaning, respect your baby's hunger and fullness cues. Don't force them. Don't cajole them into taking another bite. Babies need a lot less than we think they need. If they're turning their head away, spitting it out, pushing it away, they're telling you they're done. Even if it looks like they didn't eat much, don't worry about it. It's best to develop an authoritative parenting style rather than an authoritarian style. Authoritarian parenting is that rigid, old school, can't leave the table till you clean your plate style, whereas authoritative parents will set some boundaries and provide structure, but they remain flexible. For example, parents choose what foods will be offered, but they let the child determine if or how much of what is offered will be eaten. Parents also provide structure in the form of scheduled meal and snack times. If the infant or child chooses not to eat much at that time, for whatever reason, they're invited to eat at the next scheduled time. This helps to reduce the intake of low-nutrient processed snacks and helps babies and toddlers learn to eat when they're hungry instead of when they're bored. The period of food introduction between 6 and 12 months of age is a crucial time for the establishment of good eating habits. Avoid offering processed snacks or junk food, even if it says it was made for babies on the label. This includes things like puffs, melts, fruit snacks, etc. Let's face it, there will be plenty of times later in life when our children are offered fast food or ultra-processed snacks. When they go on field trips, they go to birthday parties, or even just in their school cafeteria. So limit these foods as much as possible in the first 3 years of life. That's those crucial first 1,000 days. This will help get them off to the best start possible. Enjoy this exciting time of exploration with your baby. Be sure to savor every moment. Take lots of photos of their reactions to trying new flavors. Everyone needs at least one photo of their child covered in spaghetti. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to eat your greens.